Right, what is going on, guys? Welcome to the second SSTO tutorial. The first episode, for those of you who missed it, there is a link on screen now or in the description if you're on mobile. I'm thinking of my mobile brothers there. Or sisters. Yep, there's a link on screen now if you want to go back to the first part of the tutorial. That was a Minmus SSTO guide. This is a lot more advanced than that tutorial, so if you're not familiar with that video, or if you haven't practiced on that video for whatever reason, then go and do that now, and then come back here. After you've done that several times, you've got completely used to using SSTOs, and then we can do this one, which is a lot more advanced, and it is a Duna SSTO. For those of you with a keen eye, you might have noticed this is exactly the same spaceplane as the one featured in the latest episode of Juna Attacks. In fact, this is exactly the same footage as the one from Juna Attacks. You're about to see that little camera angle I used as it was taking off for a minute. That was the mod camera tools, for those of you that will inevitably ask what mod that was. Camera tools, great mod if you make videos, otherwise it's not really that useful. But yeah, this is going to have a different sort of theme to the previous video. This is going to be a lot more sort of laid back, I guess the word would be. Like the last one was very sort of hands-on, like it was a live commentary and all the footage was made specifically for the tutorial. This one's going to be a bit more sort of taking a step back. It's not going to be a live commentary for one thing, and it's basically just me sort of highlighting sort of what to do and when to do it, and kind of sort of showing you how to sort of do the craft. So obviously the first thing we noticed was having a much shallower ascent than before. The Minmus SSTO I designed specifically for beginners, so it had a lot more thrust to weight ratio than it needed, so it could easily sort of go at 45 degrees or nearabouts without any trouble. This one is a bit too heavy, and indeed any sort of Duna SSTO, like if you're trying to fly the Argus class, this tutorial will also apply to you. You might even have to sort of pitch down a little bit. The Argus class SSTOs are what I just call my Mark III SSTOs. So you've got the Argus, Argus II and Engiadine. Description has links to the full SSTO playlist, and in fact there's links to the catalogue I've made with pictures of all the different SSTOs and where to download them and little bits of information about them you might not have known about. So there you go, just a little plug there. Can we get a sound effect? No sound effect. I must have just forgotten to add that when I edited this video together. Anyway, moving along swiftly from that little segue. Obviously this video has just been fast forwarded a little bit just to sort of speed things along, because the raw footage of this was well over 2 hours, and that's too long really, I think. No, then that's more than what I would expect most people to sit through. I thought about breaking this up into multiple parts, a bit like the Scott Manley tutorials, but I was just like, nah, we'll just get it done in one video. That was it, that was the logic there. So the biggest issue when it comes to heavier SSTOs, which you'll probably find on what most interplanetary SSTOs will run into this problem, where they literally cannot get fast enough to get into orbit. They'll eventually just end up getting too high, and then the engines will flame out, and they'll be going about 200 meters per second, which obviously nowhere near the 2300 meters per second that's necessary for orbit. The reason is, for whatever reason, there's probably a very good reason actually, but the Rapiers don't reach their full thrust until you're going about 400 meters per second, which is quite hard to get to. But once you get to the initial 400 meters per second, it's fine after that. That's why a lot of SSTOs, like especially my bigger ones, like I was saying earlier, the Argus class, they actually incorporate jet engines just to help get them up to speed. However, Mark II SSTOs do not need jet engines. Don't put jet engines on a Mark II SSTO. Unless you really want to for some reason, just because it's dead weight, they flame out too early and they're completely useless after about 1800 meters anyway, so they're kind of just they're just dead weight for too long. So we're just going to go with 4 Rapiers, 2 nuclear engines. If you went bigger, sort of Mark III, I'd probably say 4 nuclear engines and 8 Rapiers. That's generally the configuration I use. Maybe add a turbojet in there, because your dry mass is already enormous. It wouldn't really make a huge difference having one or two turbojets, but yeah, I'm digressing here. So what we want to do is once we get to about sort of probably about between 95 and 10 kilometers, you can see it's sort of going down now. We're just going to begin to tap that F button here and sort of pitching the nose down, just because the Rapiers on their own can't get to 400 meters per second in this particular SSTO, which the craft file is in the description this time. I didn't provide a craft file in the Minmus tutorial because I kind of went over how to build it and where to place the parts, so that was kind of good practice. So now I'm confident that you know how to build a space plane, so you should be able to just look at this craft file and see how everything goes together, and hopefully you can build it from this video. But don't worry if not. You might notice the just very quickly, we've got a little graphic appearing here. You can see those fuel tanks behind the shock cones. There's like the 2 smaller ones, and one of them I've actually locked off the oxidizer to by just unticking the oxidizer box, so we'll have a little bit of oxidizer available to us when we try and take off from Juna. So you can see I pitched up slightly, just try and get an extra bit of altitude, trying to get to 10 kilometers. Once we get to that altitude, we're going to start to sort of tap the F button, which is kind of a nice way of automatically making the nose to sort of go down without sort of forcing down too much and you end up overshooting. So we're going to try and level off, see if we can get as much speed when flying flat. We are actually beginning to descend now. I think ultimately we do have to point our nose down a little bit more just to get as much speed as possible, really, because those rapiers just can't get the speed they need to get to on their own until they get to 400 meters per second. So what we're going to do is we're going to nose down and actually let gravity do some of the work. So by doing this sort of power dive maneuver, we're actually accelerating even more because we're falling back down to Kerbin and we're getting that extra burst of speed. And once we do, very slowly begin to pitch up. Obviously we now have achieved that speed, so we can begin to pitch up again, and you can see very slowly our prograde vector is starting to move up again, and we can begin to ascend. And now we're going to ascend at a really, really fast rate. So but we still want to try and sort of get, so we kind of want to, at this point we want to try and balance ascending and building up as much speed as possible. You're going to try and aim for 1300 meters per second by the time you get to about 20 to 25 kilometers. You want to be kind of going about 1300 meters per second. That's kind of that's pushing the fastest you can make it. Well, let me start again. That's probably the fastest speed you can really get to on air-breathing engines alone, and it's also the fastest that really that cockpit can survive without exploding. 1300 meters per second can vary from cockpit to cockpit. That tends to be sort of the speed limit at which things start to explode, basically. So yeah, we're going to try and aim for 1300 meters per second. Here we are, just getting some little shots for the video, but we can probably just speed the footage up a little bit just for this part of the video so you can sort of more easily sort of appreciate this sort of maneuver I'm doing here, which is where we're just going to gradually flatten out as we get to that 20 kilometer mark, and at 20 kilometers you can fire up that nuclear engine because the ISP is about 790, which is basically what it is in a vacuum. So yeah, we want to try and aim for that, and you can watch that fuel gauge there, little arrow appearing again by the cockpit. You can see that ladder in the cockpit getting quite hot, and also the air brakes tend to be at risk of exploding as well. So we're just going to gradually sort of try and hold this speed here. We're still accelerating and our apoapsis is still sort of increasing, but we want to try and sort of make sure that we're not beginning to lose speed too much when those rapiers really sort of begin to fail, which they are starting to get to the end at which they will work. So we can just sort of, oh, hang on, there we go. Right, so the rapiers are now engaged. We'll just drop the video back down to normal speed, and we're going to make sure we're going to hit the number 4, I believe is what I toggled the action group for the shock cones, just so we can minimize the drag and we can just begin to pitch up. So you can see we sort of very slowly pitched up to about 30 to 40 degrees. You don't want to be too aggressive because if we pitch up too much, the plane is going to create a lot of drag because all that air is just slamming into the base of it, and it's going to be causing more drag and we're not going to get as much acceleration. So kind of, this seems to be kind of, your mileage may vary. You can experiment, sort of make an F5 sort of quick save, you know, when you press Alt F5 so you can name it, and then you can just experiment with different sort of angles of attack to try and find the best balance. But we're going to try and throttle down a little bit to about 50% here, because if we're going at full throttle, we end up going to be spending so much fuel fighting the atmosphere and not as much fuel as we possibly could just using that to gain altitude. That was a horrific way of phrasing that, but yeah, if you thrust up too much too low down in the atmosphere, you're going to waste a lot of fuel fighting against the air resistance. So, but now you can see we're starting to, if you look at the altitude gauge at the top there, we're in the really thicker part of the atmosphere now, very, very minimal flames and everything on the side of the plane, so we can throttle back up, and our rapiers are running out of oxygen quite rapidly. Obviously our oxygen oxidizer levels are not going to get to completely zero because we do have a little bit of oxidizer in those tanks behind the shock cones that have been locked off, so we can use that fuel when we get to Juna. So we're just going to physical time warp. We're going to sort of warp the video as well. Like I said earlier, earlier in the last tutorial, continue thrusting with the nuclear engines for now because they will provide very, very little acceleration. The thrust rate ratio is horrible, so we're not going to have enough sort of time to circularize if we started burning at apoapsis. So we need to sort of burn as soon as possible, really, because, like I say, we can see how long that burn is now. If we started burning at the maneuver node, by the time our burn was completed, we would have probably hit the atmosphere again, just because that wind is not great. So generally when doing any kind of nuclear burn with SSTOs, or I guess any nuclear vessel really, you want to try and sort of place the maneuver node about halfway through your burn. So if it's a 30-second burn, you start burning 15 seconds before the burn. This is a fact that I've yet to sort of confirm is true. This is something someone told me at the pub, so who knows if it's true? Who knows? But it seems to make sense in my mind, so I've been kind of going by this rule. So, you know, again, your mileage may vary. But yeah, hit the P button to toggle the solar panels. That's of course if you're using the Solar Action Group mod, which you really should. It binds all the solar panels to the P button. If not, when you download the craft file, or if you choose to build it yourself because you're a very good KSP player and following this video along as you should be, then you've just toggled the solar panels to, I don't know, the 8 key or something. Yes, we're just going to quickly raise our periapsis up a little bit, just to try and get our orbit a bit more circular by warping to our periapsis and not completely overshooting like I do in all my videos. Yes, here we go, and we're just going to go ahead and sort of skip through this part of the video because we want to get to the real sort of the thick of the video, which is making a maneuver node to Juna. So we're just going to quickly show this little shot actually of just transferring fuel, because I still get people claiming I've used hyperedit in videos when they see delta V change, and that's because I'm pumping fuel into the main tanks. The nuclear engines can access it, so obviously the delta V is going to go up. So yeah, that's just one of those things that really sort of grinds my gears, just people not researching their arguments, which of course very rarely happens on the internet. So yeah, you know. So actually what we're going to do is going to send the prograde thing on the maneuver node. You can see we've got a Juna node straight away, and that's because before this video I actually planned ahead for once and set Kerbal alarm clock, which is another mod you should be using, to set up a transfer window. So a lot of people say, oh, you got to go and do maths to work out transfer windows by going on the internet and calculating things, and it's all terribly complicated. Just get the mod Kerbal alarm clock, put it in your game days file, and it does it all for you. Just click the little alarm. Let's slow down the talking. Click the little alarm clock in the top right hand corner next to that Kerbal Engineer and HyperEdit logo, which does disappear at one point in the video when I realised, oh, I've still got HyperEdit installed and didn't want to give people reason to doubt the legitimacy of this video, so you will see that disappear at some point. But that's besides the point. So yeah, go and download Kerbal Alarm Clock and... oh, we've got a nice little cinematic shot there for the video. Yeah, go and download Kerbal Alarm Clock and install it, and what you do is you just click the little alarm clock logo, and there's like a little tab for transfer windows. So before you launch, click on transfer window and click, I don't know, Kerbin to Juna. Obviously your parent will be the sun, and it will say, oh, this will be in 1 year's time. So you obviously launch your vessel in a year's time, and you can obviously time warp through the time. And that's pretty much it, and it's as easy as that. So we now have a Juna intercept, so we can fast forward through this part of the video. We'll just play it at times 4 speed, so you'll be getting sort of a nice sort of little time lapse of my journey to Juna. And then we can look at aero capturing. So with Duna SSTOs you really don't have very much delta V to work with, so we don't really want to spend fuel circularizing when we could do it all using Juna's atmosphere. Now the great thing about Juna's atmosphere is it's very thin, so if we just drop our periapsis down to about, I usually aim for about 25 kilometers, but I think in the video I ended up using 24 kilometers, or in fact 23,900 kilometers, so really sort of, you know, I like to live on the edge, as most of you know. So all you do is just sort of point anti-radial or radial, depending on which sort of side of Juna you've entered on, and lower your periapsis to around that height, and you should have no problems aerobraking at all. And obviously there's the obligatory disclaimer that this video is filmed with 100% re-entry heat enabled, so don't worry about me sort of cheating the system and playing you like a fiddle by having re-entry heat at something other than 100%. So we are now ready to aero capture. So we're just going to point ourselves prograde for a second whilst first things first, we're going to toggle our solar panels off, and then we're going to enable our air brakes, which I haven't done yet. There we go, there go the solar panels. We can also just enable those control services if you chose to disable them during the flight. You probably wouldn't need to do that, but I just did it for the sake of the video, just to make the video look nicer. You probably won't be making a video, so it's not really a problem. But then again, KSP OCD can be quite common among players, so you might find it looks a bit out of place to have control services activated during flight. So getting another little epic camera shot for the video, but as you see, we're now hitting the atmosphere, so we're going to really sort of pitch up quite aggressively. You might even want to make it point radially using the SAS unit, just so we can get that nice sort of belly flop. That's what we're aiming for, a belly flop. So the whole plane is kind of acting as an aero brake. So although we've got those air brakes enabled to provide a sort of quite minimal amount of drag at this stage, really, because basically most of the drag we're creating is being done with the actual body of the aircraft rather than the individual aero brakes. Air brakes, not aero brakes. Yeah, we're just getting our little shots of the video. Don't they just look like two peas in a pod? Yeah. And we are watching the map view to see if we can get a circular orbit, and it looks like we're going to be able to do it. I know we're going to be able to do it because I've already done this mission, so yeah, we have done well. We're not expecting to get a sort of perfect, it's going to be a very eccentric orbit that we're already ascending, so really try and get as much drag as you can and just kind of accept it's going to be an eccentric orbit, and we'll be re-entering very shortly, almost immediately in this particular tutorial because of the power of post-production video editing. I can just time obviously do another little quick save. You'll notice I'm just kind of left where I quick save in, just so you can get a rough idea of when's a good time to quick save, which is always, really, it's never not a good time to quick save if you ask me. Here we are, just doing a little a nice little panning camera shot again. Is that called a Doppler shot? I'm not too sure. I know good film, me. So here we are, just sort of approaching the atmosphere quite rapidly now, and we're actually in the atmosphere now, and I still haven't. There we go. There go the solar panels, and we're just gonna do our little belly flop maneuver. Now this plane has quite a lot of electric charge, actually, way more than it needs to, but I'm just a sucker for symmetrical craft, and those are the smallest capacity batteries that fit into a Mark 1 fuselage component. And I didn't really want just the sort of the batteries that can plop on externally, just because it looks a bit sort of lame on an aircraft, if you ask me. So we are just doing our belly flop maneuver, and we're really sort of killing a lot of speed here. So we're definitely going to re-enter. Got a little bit of a glow from the cockpit, but no temperature gauges ended up showing up, I don't think. So like I say, Juna's atmosphere is incredibly thin. Now actually what you might have noticed is we're actually on an eccentric Juna orbit here, which is fine, it's all fine, but it means that it's going to be quite interesting getting back to the Kerbal Space Center when we go back to Kerbin. But this video will show you how to get to the Kerbal Space Center from an eccentric Kerbal orbit. In fact, my orbit was pretty much 45 degrees around Kerbin, which is pretty much worst case scenario, so it'll be a good thing to learn how to land at the runway from such a scenario. I'm just going to cut here quickly, actually. I thought it was quite funny. I was just doing some shots for the video and I accidentally clicked IVA instead of EVA on Jebediah there, so that was it. I thought that was quite funny. Anyway, quick load back to this clip here, which I'm just going to quickly show you, is me pumping fuel into the front tanks, just because now we've got about half our fuel left. The balance is going to be thrown a little bit off on this plane. We might find that the centre of mass is too far back, because obviously those nuclear engines and rapiers are very, very heavy, so could well be that you might find that the centre of lift is now in front of the centre of mass, and the plane just becomes uncontrollable when you try and glide it around on Juna. If that is the case, just pump fuel as far forward as you can, and that should help to stabilise it. And this clip was left in for comic relief as well, because I completely fudged my landing, so let's try that again. Okay, so when you're preparing to land, you don't do it in physical time warp like I am. Well, I mean, you can if your plane is quite well built, but yeah, we're going to turn on those lights, drop the gear down, and we're going to just prepare to land. So put the brakes on, of course, and with Juna, it's almost essential to have a parachute. The only times I've ever landed on Juna without a parachute for my SSTOs are the single stage 20 video, which caused me a lot of grief landing on Juna without parachute. So always bring chutes. So I actually bring drogue chutes here just to do a little bit of slowing down when we're in the air, and actually deploy some bigger parachutes as well. So I think I bound these to the 7 and 8 keys in the action group. So, but you can just use staging if you want as well. It doesn't really make a difference. I don't really like using staging because it can often get, I don't know, I always just mess it up somehow. So yeah, bond it to the action groups, and then that allows you to use them again quite easily when you land at Kerbin if you just repack them using an engineer, which you should have brought because there are 6 chairs, so odds are one of them would have been an engineer if you didn't plan for that. And we have now stopped. So obviously we can quick save at this point, and we can just fast forward the whole antics at Juna, because I did a lot of sort of shots trying to get different angles for the video, and quite frankly it's just not that interesting to watch. So you saw we have now enabled the oxidizer in those tanks behind the shock cones, And we also want to make sure that the rapiers are set to closed cycle mode as opposed to air breathing mode. And finally, obviously, just double check your control surfaces are still activated and make sure your shock cones are closed. So we're going to do some initial acceleration with just those nuclear engines, try and get as much speed as possible, and we're basically going to fire those rapiers as soon as we get even fractionally airborne. So we're actually able, we got a bit lucky again, we've got this little ridge here. As soon as we get into the air, we're going to just hit those rapiers and just going to shoot up 45 degrees pretty much, or as a steep trajectory, because we basically want to use those rapiers to get our trajectory away from the ground, because the nuclear engines just don't have the thrust to weight ratio to do it on their own. Bigger craft, the ones that use like 4 nuclear engines, often can have enough thrust to weight ratio to get off the ground using nukes alone, but in this craft with only 2 nuclear engines, whilst it's probably doable if you have the patience, it's a much sort of surefire way of getting off the ground if you just have a little bit of oxidizer dedicated to getting off Juna. I often do this for Mun SSTOs as well, which have a little bit of oxidizer left just so you can get off the surface. Now I have to confess at this point a couple of things. First of all, you might notice at the end of this burn I actually have a bit more delta V than I did in the Duna attacks video, and that's just because that ascent was absolutely awful. I was trying to do a lot of sort of cinematic shots and things. I ended up getting a less than optimal flight ascent. That's a phrase, isn't it? And it was just awful. I didn't want to show it in the video just because I don't want people to try and emulate that particular flight path. In fact, this one here is also not that great. I was trying to get the plane pointing 90 degrees and overshot, and then I tried to sort of compensate with the fact we'd have an eccentric orbit for some reason, and it didn't work out too well. So but yeah, basically you want to try and aim. I'm not really sure what the perfect ascent trajectory for Juna is, to be honest. I just want to go out there and say that right now, that I want to just declare my ignorance right there, because I don't want to be spewing false information out, which I've probably done already, but at some point I've probably said something that wasn't completely accurate, but there we go. So we're just going to get some nice, choosing some shots that we could use for the thumbnail potentially, so just using F2 and F1 we can take some nice shots for the Anyway, where was I? Oh yeah, so the perfect ascent, I think I usually go for about 40 degrees, 30 degrees, just because that tends to be, in my mind, that's a good balance of trying to get out the thick part of the atmosphere as fast as possible whilst also conserving some speed and minimising drag. But basically, Juna's atmosphere is quite thin anyway, so it's not a massive issue getting off the surface. But yeah, just keep an eye on the atmosphere indicator, the atmospheric thickness indicator underneath the altitude meter. When that starts to get really thin, we could start to level out a little bit more, and you can also look at the time to apoapsis, which I've sort of blown up that readout on the top left, just so you can see it a little bit more. You can see like the stats and things. But a lot of people asked in the previous video, they were complaining about, because my videos are filmed at 1440p, it means the UI is very small and it's hard to read the numbers. Please do not get bogged down in specific delta V. I didn't even really know anything about delta V until relatively more recently than I want to admit. I never really bothered using delta V maps or planning out specific delta V quantities at each point. I think the first time I really started paying attention to delta V was when I started doing my first Minmus SSTO videos, which was the ones where I did the rover delivery and also the Minmus crew SSTOs, neither of which work particularly well in 1.0 now, so I wouldn't recommend downloading those crafts, and I've since upgraded the designs anyway, so why would you? But just steering ourselves back off that tangent, don't get bogged down in delta V maps, just fly the plane like I'm flying it in the video and you should end up with a good amount of fuel left. If anything, just sort of pay a rough eye attention to the fuel gauges. When I was learning KSP, watching Scott Manley videos, I didn't really know what oxidizer was, to be honest, but I didn't really pay attention to fuel levels. I didn't have any mods like Kerbin Engineer. I was basically just flying it and sort of aiming for the right things. Usually I like to try and have the resources tab open, but then when I quick save or quick load, it just disappears and I forget to reopen it, so sorry about that. It was open for the first part of the video though, but like I say, don't worry about bogging yourself down in delta V and everything like that. Just sort of go on fuel levels and launch a rescue mission if worse comes to worse. It's a good bonding and learning experience. Anyway, we now have a nice chunk of delta V, so we can just cut back to the footage from the original Duna attacks video and carry on as if circular is just there. You can see, yeah, fine. So we are now time warping to our transfer node. There we go. I've actually overshot slightly because I have better time warp installed, which means we can time warp much faster than normal. So a year can be time warped through in about 10 seconds, less than a split second. So I recommend better time warp as well. Better time warp as well. If you want if you get frustrated with warping. It also has better physical warp as well, so you can actually warp slower than ×1, and also you can warp through things like ion burns or long nuclear burns really fast. So an ion burn can be done in like 5 seconds rather than 5 hours. So yeah, it's a good mod. That has my sea level approval as well, as if that means anything. But here we are, we're just making our maneuver node. So obviously we want to make it so it points backwards along Juna's orbit to get the best possible thing. So I usually just do it sort of very roughly, and then I go onto the map screen, make sure we don't get an Ike encounter there, otherwise it won't show up on the map screen. But if we just zoom out, we can see our encounter with Kerbin, at least in just a second, and we can try and get that as close as possible and see if we can line up those in. So at this point I usually just spin this around to try and get the best efficiency. I find it's just easier than just having to line up specifically with periapsis or wherever on the orbit, or trying to do it by sight when you've not got this full sort of view. I've got to stop talking in really ways that sound confusing. So we basically have our encounter here. We can do some fine tuning as we get close to Kerbin, but that looks pretty good. So we're just going to go and sort of play this whole part of the video in sort of fast motion, because you kind of know what burning engines looks like now. And if you don't, really this is far more advanced than the tutorials that you should be watching. So go and learn how to play the game first. Okay, so we're now going to begin to fine-tune that Kerbin encounter, try and get an encounter really. So we're just going to quickly, this video is played a little bit faster than it was in real time, just because it's pretty boring to watch me faff around with maneuver nodes for 10 minutes. But the long and short of it is that we don't have an equatorial orbit from Kerbin. We have a very eccentric orbit, which I didn't really want, but in hindsight it ended up being quite good, because now we can cover that in the tutorial, how to land at the KSP from an eccentric orbit. So you can just time warp now to that maneuver node. I don't know if there's any kind of... we've overshot C. It doesn't really matter, these nodes, because we're talking about such large time scales. It doesn't really make a great deal of difference anyway. And besides, we're not exactly getting a very accurate orbit anyway. We literally just need something inside Kerbin's sphere of influence. In terms of periapsis, you want to try and... If you were paying attention to the Duna Attacks video, you would have seen that 50 kilometers tends to be quite a safe altitude when it comes to aerobraking, at least for this particular SSTO. Different space planes will vary. Some of them will not be able to withstand that kind of altitude. My August SSTO certainly can't really aerobrake that efficiently, but or as in at least aerobrake at that particular altitude. But yeah, here we are. We're seeing our things freaking out there. If you want to sort of plan maneuver nodes and you find that the orbits are sort of spazzing out like that, all you do is you just put ×5 acceleration, so not physical time warp but actual time warp, and just have that, and then you can just play around with the nodes and everything will be sort of anchored in place quite steadily. So we're having a look, seeing what the delta V would be to circularize, and we can see it's not enough, so we're going to have to aerobrake to get our Kerbin orbit, which actually new to begin with. Like I said, you have to be quite frugal when it comes to delta V with Duna SSTOs, because you really don't have a lot to play around with, but I guess I was kind of doing that for the video to showcase how much delta V it would take to circularize, for reasons that were only known to me back then. So yeah, I just kind of skipped through some of the video just to get to me encountering that maneuver node, because it's just a bit boring to watch me do things that I won't end up using for the video. So we are just entering Kerbin's sphere of influence. Always remember to not like that, just to stop time warping as much as possible when you actually change spheres of influence, because you can sometimes cause the game to glitch out a little bit. So we're basically going to try and aim for a periapsis height of 50 kilometers, like I said earlier. So we're just going to point ourselves towards Kerbin's surface, so perpendicularly, so we can drop down that periapsis. So we're going to do a very gentle burn. Sometimes if you've got more than one nuclear engine, I actually deactivate all but one of them, or even just do that and then turn the thrust of the one remaining right down so we can get really accurate burns. This is particularly useful for sort of maneuvers from objects very far away, or when you're doing things like lathe captures at the Joule system, so you can circularize around Joule using lathe or Tylo, and you need to get those really sort of fine-tuned, precise maneuvers. I can see just turning up the brightness here with Planet Shine so you can see what's going on. But like I said, yeah, having really low thrust-to-weight ratio engines is quite useful. In fact, in the Joule 5 video, I actually used the mono-repellent of the main ship for a lot of the fine maneuver node adjusting, because it doesn't really take much fuel. But I'm getting sidetracked here. Let's just let's just go in and get our let's just circularize and get this done. All right. So we're going to drop down. Remember to retract your solar panels and activate the air brakes. and toggle the shot cones as well to give you a little bit extra drag. And remember to engage those control surfaces if you haven't already. So we're just now we're in the atmosphere now, and you'll find yourself getting quite hot quite quickly. We are going pretty quick, as you can see. We're only at 59 kilometers, which is often safe altitude to deploy solar panels when you're actually getting into Kerbin orbit for the first time. But now you can see we're getting a lot of flames because we're obviously going so fast. But yes, there is not a lot to talk about here that I haven't already discussed in my Minmus SSTO video, so we can just play this part of the video in fast forward mode. Really just sort of keep aerobraking until you've got a periapsis of roughly, so you've got an apoapsis of roughly 70 kilometers, which we can talk about fine tuning here on our final aerobrake. Aerobrake? No, aerobrake. I'm getting more retarded fixed up now. So you can see our apoapsis height is pretty much getting to that point where we want it to be, which of course is somewhere between 70 and 75 kilometers. That's kind of the best point. You don't want to aim for exactly 70 kilometers because it's going to be very hard to not overshoot down to the 60s, which of course is not in orbit, so we don't want that. So I like to aim for about 73 is quite a good number to aim for. So you can see we're dropping down to the 90s now, so already we're kind of at that point where we want to be. We can actually help bring that number down a little bit faster by sort of pitching that nose up gradually, just to help us sort of create a little bit more drag. Okay, that's 75 there, so we can actually drop those aero brakes now and point the nose prograde to create as little drag as possible, because we don't want that apoapsis to fall down any further really. So we're just going to point prograde to minimise our drag, and as you see it's still falling down a little bit, but nowhere near as much as it was, and that's it. We now have a good orbit, so we're going to create a little bit of, well, we're going to circularize a little bit by burning at apoapsis, but it's going to be a very low power burn, not very much delta V at all, so you can just get rid of that little readout now. We've kind of established what we're doing, and we can just time lapse through that part of the video now so we can get to the main bit that's interesting, which is how to get to the Kerbal Space Center runway from an eccentric orbit. So let's do that. So obviously I've skipped ahead in this video so we can just get to the thick of how to do this. So we're going to just keep an eye on where the space center is, so on that sort of Africa shaped continent, and we're trying to find a spot in which our orbit goes pretty much over the top of the space center and have it so the space center will kind of be there. We'll make it so the space center will be there when our ship is above it, basically. So let's try and find a place where our ship will be above the space center is what we're aiming for. So this looks about right, although our orbit isn't actually going over the space center yet. By the time we get around there, the planet will have rotated a little bit, so we'll be able to land there in theory if all goes to plan. Now you just saw me make a quick save there. That's so I could test this. If you look at that maneuver node there, that will probably be our trajectory there, and you can see how with that trajectory we basically would have landed at the Kerbal Space Center, which is great. So we only really have to burn a small amount just to get our periapsis sort of within the atmosphere really, and the air resistance will do the rest of the work for us. So we are just burning here, and we're going to get our trajectory sort of on the tip of that sort of land mass across the sea from the Kerbal Space Center. See this little island here? That's kind of a good place to aim for. You're going to just have to accept that you're going to have to do multiple. This is kind of a nice bit of scenery, isn't it? You're going to have to do multiple attempts at this. You're not going to get it on the first try. I think it took me, actually this only took me one attempt, but I've done this before, so you know it will probably take you quite a few. So prepare for hours of frustration as you do this. So obviously we're going to just bracing for our final re-entry, so we're going to retract those solar panels, and we're going to deploy those air brakes so we can slot in, so we can good. Yeah, so we can slow down and safely get to the Kerbal Space Center, because we still have to be wary of the fact that we could overheat and explode, even going at this sort of slow speed, because whilst we were aerobraking before, we were only airbraking to 50 kilometers. Now we're going all the way into the thick parts of the atmosphere where explosion and overheating poses a very real threat. So you can actually see the continent that we are aiming for rapidly approaching over the horizon. So obviously we're going to fly as level as possible, and by level I mean obviously sort of pointing towards prograde. We're actually going to tilt a little bit to the right, because obviously the Kerbal Space Center is to the right, and in a minute we're going to begin to nose up, because we really want to try and aggressively steer ourselves towards the Kerbal Space Center. Yes, that was all I have to say about that really. So We're just going to keep an eye on ourselves, and here we are. We're actually entering the atmosphere now properly, proper gooden. So you can see that those flames lapping at the side of the craft. And we're actually going to play this a little bit fast motion, just because this video is going to be way too long otherwise. But I think it also makes it easier to sort of visualize just kind of the whole flight plan, because it's happening quite quickly in front of you in quite a smooth way, so you can see how I'm doing it. So tilting the tilt plane to the side of that helps us steer that way, and it also means that we're sort of creating that belly flop effect again, where where the whole plane is acting as like one giant air brake. And obviously we have to keep an eye on that cockpit overheating. That's always the thing that will overheat, so just tilt the plane around to sort of create a lot more drag and slow yourself down even more to lessen any temperature gauges that appear. So the air brakes in the cockpit are really the sort of things you want to be watching out for. And here we are basically readying to touch down. So you'll notice me employing a few of the tricks if you wanted to just rewind the video so you can double check. You'll have seen me employing a couple of the tricks I told you about in the Minmus video, where that you fly level and then sort of dive down to get a bit of speed, then pitch up again, just so you can keep on moving forwards at a bearable rate rather than just sort of gliding down properly, I guess. And my landings are usually quite terrible, so I like to quick save just before landing, so it doesn't really matter too much if we mess up, but I think I nail it first time. So yeah, I decided not to use the lights in the end, just because it's going to be a bit overwhelming, because I am using Planet Shine to illuminate the Kerbin Space Center at night, so you can see and I can see and everyone is happy. So we are now just sort of pitching our front gears up here and touchdown. So we've got those parachutes, we may as well use them, so we're going to deploy the drogue chutes and then ultimately those main chutes on the windows, really? The wing mounted engines. Sorry, I breathed quite hard into the microphone then, didn't I? But that's it. You have now flown your first Duna SSTO mission. The first of many, I hope. So I actually added that crew cabin, Mark II crew cabin, said it correctly in this video, because it's very easy then to replace it with a cargo bay. Generally your cargo bays will weigh less than that Mark II crew cabin, so you could easily switch that out for a Mark II cargo bay with very little, if any, modification required to the actual craft itself. That's kind of the logic of me putting that crew cabin in these SSTOs, and that's it. I hope you enjoyed this short two-part series on how to fly interplanetary SSTOs. I might do a third episode if there'll be a poll throughout this video, that little information thing at the top right, asking if you'd like to see a third episode that might cover something like flying the Argus SSTO. But actually I've already done commentaries for SSTOs before. Links are on screen. Links appeared on screen a minute ago. You can watch them if you want a little bit more insight, but I think I've done a pretty good job being comprehensive here. So thank you for watching and happy flying. Oh, fly safe. Fly safe. That's quite a racist accent, really. In fact, that was Irish. Fly safe. Fly safe. Fly safe. Fly. What am I doing with my life?